Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, All the Power, Big Teddy G. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin 1. Beginnings. It's been a year since his mother took him to the doctors to get his quirk checked. A year of bullies and looks of derision. His closest friend became his most violent adversary, with Katsuki's followers joining in whenever they can. Izuku was smarter than most, and he could see how people began to treat him because of something everyone has. From the day he returned from the doctors, his life became hellish. At first, he didn't understand why teachers and other adults looked at him in a particular way, but he learned what that was. It was pity. He had to learn through the internet what the facial expression was, because when he asked his mother, she turned away in sadness. From pity turned to worse as his life went on. But his dream of being a hero kept him going on with a smile. Some days felt harder to smile than others, but he tried his best anyway. Izuku still tried to get along with his classmates, but they mostly pushed him away from his quirklessness or mocked him for thinking such a thing as befriending them. He was beginning to learn what loneliness was. A year after the fated doctor's appointment marked the worst day of his beginning life. It was a Saturday, and Izuku played alone in his room with his action figures. His mother had the day off and was in the living room while he distracted himself from everything. He was reenacting a fight between All Might and a villain from the news when he felt something at the corner of his eye. He looked in that direction to see nothing but the wall. He felt it again, but in the direction of the sunny window. Looking at it gave him the same result of nothing being there. Confused, he tried to think what might have gotten his attention, but his only answer was a quirk. His quirk. He had a quirk. He felt something, he didn't know what, but excitement surged through him. With a quirk, people will be nice to me, he thought. In joy, he ran out of his room and to his mother, who sat on the couch reading a book. "Mama! Mama!" he shouted in glee, startling his mother. "What is it, Izuku?" she asked when she had calmed her beating heart. He clenched his fists and vibrated with barely contained joy. "I have a quirk," he said, but his joy came crashing down when his mother looked at him the same way the others had, with pity. The rush of elation was replaced with confusion and other things he couldn't understand until later on. "Lying is bad, Izuku. Don't do it again," she said gently and turned to her book again. But Izuku felt wrong. He felt sad about his mother brushing him off so quickly and the indignity of not being believed. His mother cut him off before he could argue. Izuku didn't know what to say as he backed away with tears beginning to come up. He stayed quiet as he returned to his room and cried silently. He tried to bring that feeling back from earlier, but he couldn't. As he cried alone, he couldn't get the image of his mother looking at him with pity. It made him sad and mad at the same time. He didn't want to see that expression on his mother's face, especially when it was directed at him. He had enough of that outside his home. This day would mark when his life began to worsen. Slowly, as life went on and years went by, his mother grew more distant towards him. She began to take longer shifts at work, and when she wasn't at work she spent them by herself. When Izuku grew old enough to take care of himself, she switched to the night shift. Less and less they saw of each other as time went on. Izuku learned to cook and take care of himself at a young age. When food ran out, his mother left him money for groceries or lunch. By 9, he was getting groceries by himself when his mother left him a note saying she didn't get a chance to do it herself. It was becoming rare if he saw her once a week. School life only got worse as Izuku grew up. It was not uncommon for Izuku to come home with bruises or burned clothes. He never mentioned his suspicion of a quirk to anyone lest they call him a faking something and making things worse than they are. Katsuki ramped up his abuse slowly as they grew up. He went from pushing and name-calling to using his quirk on Izuku and punching. Izuku had tried to fight back once, but it ended worse than on other days. Now he tried to avoid getting corned as much as possible. The teachers never said anything and turned a blind eye to everything that Izuku was a victim of. He had tried to talk to his mother, but nothing came as a result of it. He went to the principal's, but he brushed him away and claimed he had better things to do. As weeks went by with the same treatment, Izuku began to hate. It was a new feeling for the green-haired boy, but as Katsuki laughed at his broken finger caused by him, Izuku knew pure hatred. With the new feeling guiding him, Izuku stuck back at the laughing tormentor. Katsuki reeling back with a broken nose, with a grunt of effort, he sat up and began to head to the hospital for his broken finger. The last time he had been in a hospital was when he was told he was quirkless. He picked up his books and put them back in his bag and headed off. He thought about calling his mother but decided against it since she was probably still asleep. He can take care of himself, he has been for a while. He arrived at the hospital and moved to the desk with the nurse behind it. The waiting room was empty as he approached her. "Excuse me, I have a broken finger. Can you help me?" He had more than a broken finger, but the cuts and bruises can come later. "Of course, dear." She smiled at him, quickly pulled out a form, and grabbed a pen. "Can I get your name and quirk?" "Sure, Izuku Midoriya, and I'm quirkless," he said, waiting for the reaction. She stopped and looked at him with compression and badly hidden disgust. "I see, well, we don't have any available doctors at the moment. You will need to call and make an appointment for the future." She crumpled up the form with his name and threw it away. "But that's the policy." Izuku's shocked statement was cut off harshly and followed by a glare. In a single word, a person's disposition toward him flipped like a switch. She continued to glare at him until he left through the door he came from. He numbly walked away from the place where they are supposed to heal him with a broken digit. As he began to make his way to a store, his anger grew at the unfairness of it all. He bought a medical kit and something to splint his finger. In his room and still damp from his shower, he straightened his crooked finger with a whimper and taped it straight with what the first aid kit had. After that was done and he wiped his tears away, he cleaned the rest of the cuts on his body and took care of his bruised ribs. At 9 years old, Izuku learned how to deal with broken bones and what to do for them. He studied what he should do just in case he was rejected by another hospital. All the while he never told his mother, he could take care of himself. Time passed with Izuku having to learn that no one cares for the quirkless, or at least him. At 10 he went to a police station to report what had happened. Izuku had just gotten his final exam back and was disappointed and confused to see he had gotten a C- for his grade. Once he began to go through his answers, he saw that they were marked wrong when they were correct. He brought it to his teacher's attention. "How could a quirkless like you get a better grade than the others? You must be cheating. Be grateful that I didn't fail you outright." He threw his final exam back at Izuku with a sneer, and he heard the snickering coming from his horrid classmates. With that, he took his exam and went to the principal's only to get the same results. Now he stood in front of the desk with a cop behind it. He told him what had happened, and the policeman seemed to take everything in until his quirk was brought up. Izuku almost missed it, but the policeman paused and then continued. After that, the cop told him they will open an investigation and see what come up. With that, Izuku left the police station with some relief that someone finally listened to him. A week went by and Izuku never heard anything from the police. After school and after escaping from Bakugo, he made his way to the same police station to find out what had happened. "Oh, sometimes reports get lost or are set back in priority. Let's just make another one just in case," the same policeman said as he pulled another form out and began to write the same report as last week. Once his report was rewritten, he left with a wave. He waited for a moment before peeking through the glass doors in time to see the cop take his report and feed it to the recycling bin. Izuku stared at the cop in disbelief and anger at what he had done. It was obvious that he had done the same with the first one as well. With angry tears, Izuku made his way home. After all, what could he do if the police ignore you already? From that day on he began to keep every assignment and test that was marked wrong by the teacher. His grades fell as his teachers sabotaged him, so quirked students got better grades than the quirkless. The file grew bit by bit with failed papers. While he was at it, he grabbed an empty notebook and began to write each time he was bullied or something of import happened. He didn't know what to do with them, but he held on to them until he thought up a plan. That's how Izuku's life for the next few years went, with Bakugo torturing him with his quirk and Izuku not being able to fight back. His grades were marked lower so others looked better. And his mother has grown as distant as she could without moving out and leaving him alone. The only thing that changed in his life was the feeling coming back every once in a while. He had tried to understand what was going on many times, but he never was able to reproduce the feeling at will. It was never constant either. Sometimes he felt a pull towards the wall or something, a place in empty space. He had given up on trying to figure out what was going on. Izuku was 15 as he sat in class and waited for the day to be over. The teacher was talking about their future but threw the papers into the air as everyone cheered to follow a hero's career. Izuku hadn't written anything because if he did, he was sure the teacher would call him out. The bell rang and Izuku packed his notebook away but was snatched by Bakugo. He flipped through it and stopped at Izuku's profile of death arms. His followers laughed openly at his diary, as they call it. Still being a freak, Deku. Katsuki snarled at Izuku's blank face. Izuku's blank face hid rage behind it as Katsuki called him his favorite name. That rage only grew as Katsuki exploded his notebook and threw it out the window. He could only stare as his ruined work flew through the window and disappeared. He couldn't let any of his anger show or else Katsuki would beat him for it. It had happened before. If you want a quirk so bad, take a swan dive off the roof and pray you get one the next life. Bakugo's words hit Izuku and his rage built, but he kept his face blank. Nothing to say, freak. He sneered and then turned away with his followers laughing. Izuku's face contorted into hate as he tried his best to calm down. The footsteps were long gone and he was the only one in the room as he frothed at the mouth at the unfairness of it all. After he had sufficiently calmed down, he picked his notebook up and headed home. He flipped through his ruined work as another noise caught his ear. Burbling came up from the sewer lid and a goo slipped out. Floating eyes focused on Izuku. Medium-sized invisibly cloak. Perfect. His smile was the only warning as Izuku was enveloped in slime. Izuku couldn't do anything as he began to drown in the thick fluid. He raged against his bindings but it was no use. For a moment he felt that feeling but it was gone as he began to black out. When he woke up next it was to his favorite hero slapping him awake. After an embarrassing stuttering and a signed notebook, Izuku approached All Might to talk. Hey, All Might. Can I ask you no time, justice waits for no one. He was cut off rudely and Izuku felt a twinge of anger build up. Well, all right, but the bottles are that's all he said before Izuku was dragged along for the ride. With panic, he latched onto his leg and grabbed the bottles that were about to fall out. Hey! What are you doing? Forget it, I'm landing now. All Might held onto Izuku's back as he made his descent. Oh, thank whatever God is listening. Izuku knelt on the rooftop. That was reckless, young man. All Might said in a hurry and began to walk away. Wait, I was trying to fix the bottles so they wouldn't fall out mid-leap. Izuku held out the bottles with the villain in it. Ah, I see. Well, All Might's came out strained and then his body puffed into smoke. After the panic and explanation, Izuku handed over the villain. I've got a question, what advice do you have to someone like me to be a hero? Advise. What's your quirk? He asked, securing the bottles in his pocket. He hesitated in answering. I don't have one. You don't have, here's my advice, don't. Hero business isn't fun and games. If you want to make a difference, go be cop or doctor. Have some realistic dreams. And he left Izuku on the rooftop, alone. Izuku stood there with an empty chest. He didn't cry or yell or anything, he just stood there as he felt nothing. He wanted to be angry at the number one hero but at the moment he couldn't comprehend that even heroes don't think anything of quirkless. For a moment he glanced at the railing but shook his head and walked to the stairs. He isn't going to give up, he can't. While walking home, he thought about everything in his life and how all of it was SHT. He knew that anyone else would have given up long ago, but Izuku was stubborn and kept moving forward. That didn't change his view on the number one hero. When Izuku thought about him, he felt the same anger that he had building up for years. He felt bile come up his throat at the image of All Might and threw up in a garbage can. No, that was remaining sludge from the villain. He stopped by the store and bought some antibiotics just in case of the slime in his body. As he walked past a park, he thought about what to do. He is most likely going to sell his All Might merch since he didn't think he could stomach having his room decorated by the man who shot down his dreams. He was going to begin to work out in earnest now with the UA exams coming up. He will have to deal with the lower grades from his teacher's sabotage, but he will have to think of something for that. As he was walking, he heard a shout and turned his head to see a toddler running after a ball into the streets. His parents were running to stop him, but they wouldn't make it in time to save him from the car that was about to hit the little boy. Without a thought, Izuku dove for the boy. He felt time come to a crawl as he was able to pull the boy to him, but he felt fear. Fear for the boy that might not live and fear for himself dying. His last thoughts before the car hit his back were, "I don't want to die." All Izuku could do was hold the boy tight to his chest as the car reached the two. He heard the shouts of the parents and the car, but nothing else. Then, time sped up again and nothing happened. The car was stopped at his back. The boy's parents dove for the boy in Izuku's arms. They pulled their child into their arms as Izuku tried to understand what had happened. But he felt something in his chest, before he could examine it. He was pulled out of his head. Thank you, thank you. If you didn't use your quirk, my son would have been gone." The father held Izuku's shoulder and thanked him. "I am so sorry. The brakes didn't work. I don't understand how you stopped my car." The driver stepped out and was shaking as he looked over everyone. "No one was hurt. This young man Quirk saved my boy and probably yourself as well," the father said as he tried to calm everyone down. Izuku felt what was in his chest and knew what it was, his quirk. "I don't have quirk," he said softly. The mother who had her son in her arms caught it. "What did you say?" She patted her husband's leg to shut him up. "I didn't have a quirk." Izuku could feel tears appear at the corners of his eyes. "You jumped in without a quirk. You were quirkless," the mother said in a daze. "I have a quirk, now." He felt relief at finally getting something he wished for all his life. Anger at getting it so late and having to deal with all the grief beforehand. Joy in getting a quirk for himself. And more anger at the unfairness of having to risk his life to get something people get when they were 4. "It's all right, lad. Let it all out." The father was kneeling next to Izuku as he began to sob in his turmoil of emotions. The mother held on to Izuku's hand as she gave him her support. Izuku looked up into her eyes and saw gratitude for saving her child. That just made Izuku cry harder as this was the first kindness he had received in a long time. 2. Planning and Quirk. The parents of the child looked on in worry as their son's savior walked down the street. The man who was driving the car leaned on the hood as he also watched on with his ear on his phone. After everything was settled, he tried to start his car again, but it seems like it stalled out and he was calling a tow truck for the useless vehicle. Izuku walked into an empty apartment and collapsed on the couch. His mother was at work as far as he knew, that's how it has been for years. He sat with thoughts going through his head a mile a minute. His bully told him to kill himself, he nearly died to a sludge villain, his hero shot down his dreams, and he saved a boy by using his quirk. He has a quirk and the roiling emotions threatened to explode once again. But he pushed everything down for the moment and thought about the future. With a quirk, he could see something of a future for himself. When he was quirkless he knew he had no path for life. If the way he was treated was anything to go by, then he would never get a good job. He had read the reports of the quirkless probability to live past their 20th birthday. He has seen the deeper parts of the internet and what he could have gotten as a life for being quirkless. But he has a path now instead of getting killed or sold in the near future. He wiped the tears off of his face and began to plan for the near future. His goal was to become a hero. Working backward from there, he wrote his plan. To get into hero school, he will have to find a way to get out of the hell that was his middle school. Everyone was against him in that place and his grades were a way to prove it. He knows he has excellent grades, but the faculty changes them to look worse for the quirkless nobody. Online schooling was a good alternative. By learning online he could make his own schedule and make time to work on his quirk. He was 11 years behind everyone planning to take the UA exam. Now how to get out of school without dropping out and needing his mother's approval. He sat back and thought about the worst school that could exist. Then he thought about all the evidence he had about the teachers sabotaging his grades. Maybe give copies to people who wouldn't like what they are doing. He will research that person or people later. As for his quirk, he has a quirk. First, he will need to figure out what it is and how it can be used to be a hero. When the car hit him, he didn't feel much more than a push and something going into him, or more like transfer to him. He thought back to all those times that he felt something in the area surrounding him. He sat back on the couch and focused on the feeling in his chest. He felt the energy and it felt like it could be released at his will. All he needed was to open the metaphoric valve, and he stopped before he did something stupid. Getting up, he took a quick shower and changed into some shorts and a t-shirt. With that, he headed out into the woods close to the apartments. If he was going to experiment with his possibly dangerous quirk, better in the woods. He stopped at a small clearing and sat on the ground. Again he felt the energy, and then he released some of the energy he had. With the tiniest of drops, he opened the valve. Felt a small force expel out of his body in every direction. He jumped to his feet in absolute joy. He used his quirk. After calming down, he took out his notebook and wrote his thoughts about what he knew. Energy seemed to be released in all directions. Could he focus it? He put his palm aiming at a small pile of rocks he made and released some more energy. He felt it exit through his palm and the top pebble was knocked over. Again he cheered in success and excitement. But he didn't feel like the top rock was enough. So he aimed again and released more energy, too much. The force made the small pile of rocks explode in every direction. Pebbles went flying everywhere, some striking trees with force. He had figured out that the energy he released didn't travel far from his body, so he needed to be near to be effective. This also put Izuku in the blast radius of the rocks and was hit. He covered his face with his other arm and waited for the pain to bloom. It never did. He looked at his white shirt and saw the impacts from the rocks but felt no injuries. He felt energy settle into what remained from earlier. He had instinctively absorbed the energy from the rocks hitting him. He snatched his notebook and wrote furiously about what he discovered. It's kinetic energy he had absorbed, that's why the car was stalled. He took all the kinetic energy that contained it and from what would have hit him. He needed to test it to confirm, but how? He was not going to jump in front of a car again, so how would he absorb more kinetic energy? A minute later, Izuku sat with a long branch poised to strike his arm. If he was right about the kinetic energy, then all the energy from the block will be absorbed into his body. He focused on absorbing the strike and held his breath. With a sharp whipping sound, it stuck to his arm and he felt it stop at his arm. He looked inwards and saw more energy than before. Izuku pumped his fist in joy and yelled in victory. After calming down for the nth time that day, he wrote about the applications that it could be used in. So many possibilities cropped up and he didn't stop writing as the sun began to set. When he finished, he thought about what he had felt when he was younger in those fleeting moments. He thought about what they might have been and could only think that it was a way to detect the kinetic energy. So he tried to focus on feeling the kinetic energy by dropping a rock by his arm. After half an hour of feeling something, he began to sense the energy transfer from the dropping rock to the ground. He took in the new sixth sense and looked around. He felt the minor kinetic energy from his footsteps and his palm tapping on surfaces. With a grin, he punched a tree and felt the kinetic energy both absorb and through his sixth sense. With the biggest grin he had in years, he looked into the forest in happiness. With his sixth sense, he could see more. It wasn't kinetic energy because it was everywhere in the air. It confused him, it was like his footsteps but in the air everywhere. When he looked in the area he saw another thing, it was dark. He had lost track of time and it was dark. He grabbed his notebook and made his way to the apartment while keeping his sixth sense on. He looked at the mysterious energy that hung in the air and tried to figure out what he was looking at. He got out of the tree line and stepped onto the sidewalk. He felt more things, maybe more energy. He looked at the passing building at the energy contained in it. It was different from what was in the air. Then he passed a light post and stopped at what he saw. Through his sixth sense, he could see energy coursing through the light post. It was electricity that he was sensing. In shock, he touched the light post and felt the energy in it. It was different from kinetic, it was wild. Kinetic felt like it could be controlled and dispersed, but electricity felt like it wanted to go everywhere. Without thinking he absorbed what energy the light post had. He felt the power run through his fingers and into his chest and settle next to the kinetic energy he had left over. With a breathless laugh, he reveled in the power. Then he saw the light flicker and turn off. OSHT, Izuku stopped absorbing and let go. He looked around to see if anyone saw him and saw something somewhat worse. The near building's lights were dark, then they flickered to life. With a small bit of panic, he rushed to his apartment. He was draining the block's electricity. He ran to his door and closed it behind him as he huffed for breath. He began to laugh uncontrollably at the situation. He could absorb energy, both kinetic and electricity. How wonderful! After calming down he got off the floor and made his way to the kitchen for some dinner. A simple ramen will be good. He turned in the stove and put the water to boil. While waiting he turned his sixth sense back on and looked around the apartment. He looked at the electricity coursing through the walls by cables and then the mysterious other energy in the air. There was more inside the apartment and it was evenly spread out. He continued to try to figure out what kind of energy it was. He soon figured it out when he looked back at the gas stove. It was heat, he could see the heat radiating from the stove and boiling water. He could only stare in amazement at the heat in the air. Then he raised his hand towards the stove and stopped. He thought about the light post not 10 minutes ago. Just a small amount. He coaxed himself. He absorbed the heat and it poured into him. A torrent of energy was sucked into him and he could feel the room getting cold. Then he saw the flame from the stove getting pulled into his outstretched arm. Too much. He stopped pulling in a panic. The kitchen and living room felt cold as Izuku felt the energy again through his sixth sense. There was still some heat in the air but much less than before. He turned to the stove and the now cold water in the pot. He will need to wait for the water to boil again for his dinner. With an exhale of breath, he grabbed his notebook and began to write again. Not only one kind of energy but 3. He could feel the heat in his chest next to the other 2 as he theorized what else he could do. What other energies could he absorb? What is his limit? Could he combine them like heat and electricity to make plasma? What's his range? So many things ran through Izuku's head. This wasn't some small quirk but something powerful. After dinner, Izuku made his way to his room and stopped at the All Might-themed plank with his name on it. He remembered what he had said, be realistic. With that, he ripped it off his door and looked into his room. All Might was everywhere. His quirk forgotten, he began to strp his room of memorabilia of the number 1 hero. Carefully he put everything that was All Might related into a box and set it in his closet. With now a bare room he sat at his desk. He stared at the All Might eraser on his pencil. He placed his hand over the eraser and released some of the heat from earlier. Smoke rose from the smiling face, it melted and then burst into flames. It melted onto his palm but he absorbed the heat and solidified into a disfigured thing. He set it to the side and thought about what to do about school. He grabbed the thick folder filled with his sabotaged grades. In the folder also contained every time a teacher or peer did something else. Most of the reports were filled with Bakugo's incidents but also contained times a teacher ignored abuse or encouraged it. Just looking at what they had done to him made him seethe. He turned from the folder and searched for someone that he could send this evidence. He found some police but they left a bad taste in his mouth. He didn't know if heroes would be better, so he continued to search for people. Many names were in the maybe pile while few were crossed out outright when he looked up past reports of the person. The maybe pile was hard to choose from. It ranged from a detective to news reporters with no filters. So he decided to send evidence to all of them. He made copies and digital copies and made a plan to send them out. He kept the original and a digital copy hidden just in case. Tomorrow he will go to the post office and send everything out to the written addresses. He had 3 people who he hopes to come through. A hero agency, a news reporter, and a police detective. If they don't work, then he will just have to post everything to the public and let them do the work. If worse comes to worst, then he will probably turn into a vigilante and burn that school down and beat everyone in it. He snorted at the fantasy. He couldn't beat them up, he has not much muscle mass. That made him think about how to prepare for the exam. If he wanted to pass, then he will need to be fit and be able to fight. His quirk gave him a fighting chance, but his body will fail him if he doesn't put work into it. He looked up diets and workout plan on the internet. He was somewhat lean and just needed a bit more muscle on his arms and core. Finishing up his plan, he went to bed. He dreamed of energy coursing through veins and being able to take the power of the sun for himself and use it. The weekend morning woke Izuku and he sat up to set his plan in motion. Last night he had already found a good online school and was signed up for the coming year. He got dressed and moved to the exit to head to the post office. It took some time, but he sent everything to the 3 people he put his hopes on. After that, he went to the grocery store and got what he needed for the week with the money his mother had left him. She had left a note that she was getting a card for him, so she didn't need to leave money on the counter and now deposit it in his new bank account. It didn't matter one way or another what she did so long as he didn't go hungry and he had to pick up a job again. He made his way back to the apartment and put everything away before heading out to the woods again. With excitement, he rushed to the same clearing as last night. He wants to play with heat energy for the day. First he activated his 6th sense and focused on the heat. It was easy since there was no electricity and kinetic was somewhat artificially made. His senses sharpened and he looked around in amazement at the heat radiating from the ground by soaking the sun's rays and the trees. He closed his eyes and he could sense the trees' outline of heat and the grounds. He walked around with his eyes closed and felt the heat in the air and the forest. Izuku smiled as he felt the energy pass through his fingers and then he pulled. Heat rushed to him and was absorbed into his core. More and more thermal energy filled him as the area around Izuku began to drop in temperature. With his eyes still closed, he could see the absence of thermal energy. He could feel the area he was absorbing was spreading, which he found fascinating. He moved back to his new notebook about him and wrote what he had found out. Even if it was freezing cold, there was more heat he could have absorbed. Also, when he was absorbing the thermal energy, it seemed to spread as if looking for more to absorb. Izuku hummed in thought. Well, if a fire spreads, then I can absorb it. It will be fine, probably. He found a dry log and placed it in the clearing. He rubbed his hands and placed one close to the log and released some thermal energy. He could sense the log heat up and began to smoke, and then it burst into flames. He stared into the dancing flames with his heat sense. He didn't glean much from it, so he absorbed it slowly. The flames drew into him arm and was sucked into his core. Once the flames were snuffed out, he looked in his core. He had absorbed more than he had expelled. That makes sense since he burned a fuel for his thermal energy. Now, let's test how fast I can absorb it. Izuku put down his notebook and lit the log on fire again. He let it burn some more and then he felt the thermal energy. He imagined him grabbing it all and pulled. Like before, flames pulled into his plan, but to his shock the flames spread to the rest of the log and flash burned it. He didn't stop, absorbed it until there was nothing left of the log. He stared in shock at what he could do. What remained was an ash-shaped log. He poked it with a stick and it fell apart. He continued to poke through the ash but none of the wood remained. He had absorbed the potential energy, what had been thermal energy and what could have been. He had to try it again to confirm what he thinks. He looked at the stick and lit a flame. Again, he pulled everything he could from the stick and it turned to ash in his grip. My God, I'm strong. Scary strong. Izuku mumbled to himself in shock. Okay, maybe he could only do that to dead wood. So they found an isolated tree and lit the trunk on fire. He noticed that when he released his thermal energy it came out as actual flames instead of the intense heat like before. He was lost in though as the trunk of the tree lit on fire. This is a terrible idea. I'm going to start a forced fire. He held his hands to the sides of his head and began to panic. He moved to the small burning patch and did the same as he did with the small log. The tree was consumed in flames for a moment and then nothing was left but ash, which promptly fell on Izuku's head. Izuku coughed and spat out the fine ash as ran out of the collapsed pile of ash. He found his water and dumped it over his head to rinse out his eyes and mouth. Once he could see again he looked at what he had done. A large pile of ash lay where the tree was before. The trees around the ash were unharmed but also were hit with the cloud of ash. Right then, it works on living things. Oh gods, that is incredible power. Izuku sat with soot-stained everything as he mumbled the possibilities of his quirk. He could stop a forced fire in a flash. Burning building could be snuffed out like the first time he burned the log. That is only for thermal energy as well. What could he do with other energies? He looked in his core and he could sense so much more thermal energy than before. Now the question is, what is his limit for capacity? Because he could feel each energy and how much he could expel. But he didn't feel full, so to speak. The next question, and more importantly, how is he going to get home if he looks like he rolled around a bonfire for an hour? There was a beach that turned into a dump nearby, that will have to do. 3. Planning and Quirk Part 2. Izuku found his way to the beach with many odd looks from passing people. He stared at the dirty beach and reconsidered his thoughts of taking a swim to clean himself. He thought of the stream where Izuku used to play with Bakugo when they were children. That sounds better than getting stuck with a dirty needle. Back to the forest, it took an hour but he found the stream. He promptly dunked himself in the stream and washed the ash from his skin and clothes. The cool air and water made Izuku shiver a bit before thinking up another experiment. He held his soaking arm out and released some thermal energy to dry himself. Steam rose from his arm and sleeve. He smiled and did it again with his whole body. Steam covered Izuku and warmth filled him as his clothes dried in a moment. So cool. Izuku gushed to himself. With that done, he moved on to his plans for getting fit for the exam. He flipped through his notebook and found the exercises that he printed off the internet. He began by jogging at the forest's edge on the sidewalk. He wanted to focus on speed and less on strength. He was already lean and had alright stamina, but more is better. The weekend passed with him sore and more experiments with his quirk. He needs a name for it. He played around with electricity the next day and found out it was hard to aim with it. He could release it through his body like the other energies, but using it to blast something make the electricity arc out in every direction. He had to put out small fires when the lighting struck in random places. While powerful, it was unreliable and erratic. At short range, he could spray electricity everywhere, but he wanted to shoot lightning like the cartoons of old. Watching cartoons with lightning shooting fire benders didn't help, but it did give him the idea of looking up how lightning decides to strike during a storm. From what he understood was that lightning found the easiest path and followed it. The amount of positive charge on a target will determine where the lightning will strike. So with some experiments, he figured that if he pulled the static from his target and then released lightning through it, then he is more likely to hit his target with lightning. He laughed like a madman when it worked successfully the first time. There will always be static in the air and he can use it as a conduit for his lightning to travel to hit his target. Unfortunately, he used all the electricity he had stored. So throughout the day, he kept absorbing static energy, and drop by drop he felt electricity build up in his core. Izuku got ready for school and dreaded what will come. While he did feel better about having a quirk, it wouldn't help if he killed someone. Although, if Katsuki died, would it be a bad thing? No, then he would have to become a villain or vigilante. Not part of his plan. The day went on as usual with the sneers and mocking throughout the day. He hated it, but he bid his time and hoped that the people he sent the evidence to did something. He didn't trust them, but it was a long shot. Class after class, students and teachers looked at him with derision and pushed him around. Lunch came and he moved to the library. He had learned from experience not to bring lunch. Someone will eventually steal it, dump it, or ruin it in some way. So he instead ate breakfast and a large dinner to make up for skipping lunch. Izuku sat in his corner where he could look out the window and could see the door from his angle. The librarian ignored him, so that was worth something. Lunch ticked by and Izuku read one of a book about lightning storms. It didn't help much, but it was better than nothing. Izuku rested his eyes from the book with small letters and looked out the window. He raised an eyebrow at what he saw. Dozens of police officers and SWAT teams were rounding the corner of the school walls. Leading the first squad was a man that Izuku recognized immediately from his profile online. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi was a great detective with his quirk of lie detected. No fucking way. Izuku mumbled to himself. Izuku watched in his seat as the police rushed into the building and headed where the principal's office. Izuku never got up as police and SWAT rushed past the library and arrested a faculty member by the library doors. He looked out the window at a commotion and saw the principal thrashing in HNDCFFS and a red face being pushed into the back of a van. No fucking way. Izuku said again with glee rising in his tone. Did it work? He heard an crackling sound and saw Katsuki Bakugo behind, tackled by a SWAT team and then handcuffed with suppression cuffs. Izuku raised his phone and snapped a few too many pictures. The doors muffled the sound of the commotion throughout the whole school, but the noise was let in by the doors slamming open by a squad of police officers arresting the librarian and the rest spreading through the shelves of books. One officer with a cat quirk stopped when he spotted Izuku sitting at the corner table. Are you Izuku Midoriya? When Izuku nodded, he called through his walkie-talkie. Found him in the library. Izuku stared at the police officer and asked. So, what's going on? Izuku jerked a thumb out the window to see his homeroom teacher getting dragged by the arms to the filling police van. He snapped another picture. He'll be here in a moment. The officer said with amusement in his feline eyes. Detective Tsukachi walked into the library and headed in his direction. Hello, I am Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. Will you please come with me? He bowed and held his hand out to gesture to the exit. Am I under arrested? Izuku looked between the two men. The detective raised his eyebrow. Did you do something to warrant your arrest? Don't answer that. No, I reviewed your package and was very disturbed by what it contained. I had a warrant ordered and was approved if I could confirm one day on the security footage with what you sent me by mail. I did, and now we are arresting all the faculty and one Katsuki Bakugo. All the security cam footage is being pulled by our technicians. Now, could you please come with me to the station to get your statement and story? Izuku was nodding along the whole time he was speaking. Internally, he was jumping for joy. He had done it. Part 1 of the plan is complete. Yeah, alright, makes sense to me. Izuku grabbed his bag and followed behind the detective as the cat man followed them. The remaining students stared and glared at Izuku as he walked behind the detective to his car and got in. He couldn't contain a grin as they drove off the police station. With a sigh of relief, he felt things truly turn around for him. At the police station, Izuku sat in a conference room with the detective with a tea set out for him and coffee for the man. There was a third place, but he didn't know for who. He got his answer when his mother walked through the doors, skirted by the cat man. Right, a minor needs a guardian for police interviews. Izuku mumbled. Inko was slim but not unhealthy. She had pale skin and short green hair in a ponytail. She sat down and didn't greet Izuku. He did the same and ignored his negligent mother. Right then, the detective said awkwardly when he saw the mother and child wouldn't greet each other. He went on to ask Izuku about what he gave to the detective and his experience with the school and what they have done to make his life miserable. Izuku held nothing back as he described every small detail and told him exactly what was going on behind closed doors. "Why didn't you bring this up before?" Tsukachi asked. "I did, the first time I got a sabotaged graded paper I went to the teacher. Nothing, then I went to the principal. Nothing, then I entered this police station, and a report was written but nothing came of it. A week later, I put in another report with the same officer but peeked back to see him throw away my report when I had left." Izuku calmly explained, but anger built up at the memory. "This station. Do you remember the officer?" The detective sat forward. "He was still there at the front desk when we walked in." Izuku jerked his thumb behind the doors. The detective called through his phone and the same officer walked through with two others guiding him. "Do you remember this young man?" He pointed to Izuku. "Never met him." "Have you ever thrown away any reports due to quirk basis?" "Never." "What's this about?" The man was outraged. "Arrest him, he is lying." The detective watched as the man was dragged away by the two other officers. He rubbed his face and poured another cup of coffee. During the whole interview, Inko never said a word or looked in her son's direction. Izuku did his best to ignore everything but the man helping him for once. The interview continued until they hit the topic of Bakugo Katsuki. Since he is a minor, he will be processed carefully. With the evidence placed clear to see, it will be pretty simple from my point of view at least. He took a sip of the coffee and then continued. As for the faculty, I will interview each one to see what they admit and lie about. Footage will make things easier, but it will take time. The school will be undoubtedly closed for the foreseeable future. What are the plans to continue your education? He looked between Inko and Izuku. Inko didn't say anything, but Izuku didn't care to look. "I already am signed up for online schooling and will be taking an aptitude test for where I stand this week." "That's wonderful to hear." "That's all I have. If there are any more questions, please call me without any hesitation." He stood up and shook Izuku's hand. Inko didn't look at either of them and left without saying a word the whole time. Izuku followed his mother out of the police station and split off away from her. He didn't want to be near her any more than he needed to. He made his way to the clearing in the woods and lay down and let the sun hit his skin. He couldn't get his grin off his face at the success of his plan. He was also genuinely grateful for the detective's help and professionalism with his case. He sat up and began more practice with his lightning. He has built up enough static for 2 shots at low power. Instead, he loaded his electricity into one larger blast and aimed it at a small tree. He focused on the static in the air between the tree and Izuku and released his lightning bolt at the tree. It exploded in splinters. Izuku focused on absorbing kinetic energy and felt small amounts get sked up in his core by the wood splinters hitting him. They hit Izuku and lost all momentum the moment they touched him and dropped from his body. Except for the one stuck in his clothes that should have punctuated his skin, but the kinetic energy was absorbed before they could pierce his skin. He will need to test if he was virtually immune to a stabbing. He was sure if he was slashed then he would be cut. Another thing is grappling, while he could take a punch. That doesn't mean he was immovable, he could be picked up quite easily. He will need to theorize how he could counter such things. Brushing off the wood splinters, he made his way to the apartment and changed into running clothes and began his exercise routine. Weeks went by as Izuku continued his practice with his quirk and continued his studies online. With his progress, Izuku is expected to finish his last year of school within 6 months instead of 10 or 11. He continued to experiment with his quirk with the energies he had. Electricity was difficult to practice with since he didn't want to cause a city-wide blackout, and he was becoming more and more comfortable with thermal energy. Thermal was easy to absorb since it was everywhere, and burning logs was great for fuel. Izuku still hasn't reached a limit of how much his core could contain. One thing he did discover was that his quirk absorbing spread if he continued to pull. Usually, he could absorb about a 3-meter radius without trying with thermal. But he didn't absorb it for a short time and continued to pull in thermal energy. When he was done trying to pull as much thermal energy in the woods, he found a frozen landscape. For about 30 meters in every direction was frozen. It wasn't some below freezing cold but absolute cold. There was no heat when he focused on thermal energy. He had to radiate heat so he wouldn't start shivering. The water in the trees was frozen and the trunks were cracked open. Leaves dropped from the tree branches with soft thunks to the forest floor. This is super move, absolute zero. Izuku looked around at the winter wonderland. The next thing he discovered with his quirk was that energy released comes directly from his skin. So when he decided to see how much thermal energy he could release in a short burst, it incinerated his clothes. Luckily he thought something like this would have happened and packed extra clothes in his bag. But the experiment showed that he could essentially glass the immediate surrounding area. Which Izuku thought was really badass. Kinetic energy has been simple to practice. He could punch a tree or rock and the kinetic energy is absorbed before he could hurt his knuckles. This was a great way to practice his punches and kicks. Since he was still registered as quirkless, he isn't allowed in any dojos for martial arts lessons. So he improvised by learning from YouTube and other videos of heroes fighting hand to hand. Grappling was not possible to practice, but he got the theory down. His way of using kinetic energy was simple for combat. He strikes with his leg or arms and then released a kinetic blast for a double impact. He had to practice to get the right amount so he wouldn't launch himself every time he struck something. Blocking was unnecessary since he could just absorb it and use the energy against his opponents. Movement using kinetic energy only led to one thing. As much as he hates Katsuki, his method of using his quirk for propulsion works well. He used a short burst of kinetic to launch himself in any direction. While he needed to practice avoiding face planting every time, it was working. Luckily, if he falls he can absorb the kinetic energy and stop any injuries from happening. That's another thing Izuku practiced, dropping from large heights. Izuku knew he would be able to absorb all the kinetic energy from falling, but his monkey brain said, "You fall, you dead," and so Izuku held onto a tall tree in the woods trying to let go and practice falling. With a large inhale, he let go. Wait, no. Monkey brain activated. His hands scraped against the bark and failed to get a grip. Now Izuku was yelling in his head to absorb kinetic. The wind blew through his hair and clothes and then he felt his feet hit the ground and he stopped. His organs were all in the right place and no broken bones. Although, his breaths were ragged as he tried to calm down. An hour later, Izuku found himself at the top of the tree again to continue his practice. Months went by with the same routine of getting up early to exercise. School work and then move on to quirk practice and experimentation. His body was building muscles very well with his diet and constant exercise. Quirk has been going great, although he still hasn't reached a limit for his capacity. The amount of thermal energy stored up is beginning to get ridiculous. One week, Izuku took a break to see what other energies he could use. At first, he wanted to focus on kinetic, thermal, and lightning for the UA test. Now that he has a good grasp on them, Izuku wants to see more possible energies. First on his list was nuclear energy. Since he didn't want or have a way to test it, he crossed it off the list. Next was sound energy. It took some time to focus on the speaker of his phone, but his sixth sense picked it up and he pulled the energy into him. His phone went quiet and he felt the energy enter his core. More sound was absorbed and it began to spread as he tested his limits. Izuku's world went quiet and he heard nothing. Not his heart, the wind, or the shifting of clothes. Then he stopped and he was disoriented from the immediate change. Now to test the release of sound energy. With his hand pointed out he released a trickle of sound and nothing happened. He released some more and there was a low thrum and vibration. He used his sixth sense and he could see the sound energy expelling from his palm to the stone in front of him. He released some more and the rock cracked from the loud thrum of the energy. Izuku grabbed his notebook and wrote under sound energy. Most likely lethal, avoid using on people that shouldn't die. He nodded and moved on to the next on the list. Light energy was really easy once the sun was right over his head. His sixth sense caught the light energy coming from right above and Izuku focused on it. Light energy was similar to sound by the way it moves, it wants to spread everywhere. Izuku grabbed it and absorbed it a bit at a time. In the palm of his hand was a void of light. He could feel the light being absorbed and he pulled more. His whole body was encompassed by the void and he felt the absence of thermal energy coming in with the light energy. He saw nothing but heard everything just fine. It was very disturbing to see not a dark room but void, the absence of light. He stopped and he could see again. Releasing light had not much direct combat effect. In his hand was a globe of light that brightened when he released more energy. Could blind someone, void darkness, and then bam the holy light of God. Izuku chuckled at that. Now, Izuku had a theory that he could absorb the unique energy of a quirk but he had no one to test it with. Say if someone used light beams to attack, he could possibly absorb the light and thermal. He hopes one day he could put it to the test. 4. Entrance exam. Izuku was on the roof of his apartment and he was looking over the edge. He inhaled and then exhaled and then ran and leaped off the roof. He plunged 7 stories and landed on the dark street without a sound other than his shoes scraping on the ground. He exhaled again and pumped his fist in success. It took a long time for him to shut up his money brain and leap without hesitation. He found the idea of leaping off enormous heights only to land without even having to bend his knees, very cool looking. Izuku made his way to the woods again to practice his stealth skills. With the combination of absorbing light and sound, he moved in absolute darkness. Then, he focused on thermal energy with his sixth sense and he was practically invisible. Except for the large globe of void moving across the woods without a sound. He smiled and genuinely laughed at the scenario of him sneaking around with a void suit covering him. He has plans for that but it's difficult to keep what he absorbs limited to close to his skin. He has managed an arm that was shrouded in the lightless void but more than that was difficult. He made it to his clearing and looked around at the destruction. Trees were dead or dying from getting frozen over and over again. Piles of ash were in random locations and craters filled the area from his kinetic blasts. He had come far with his quirk and its application for it. He sat down and focused on his sixth sense and focused again on the thermal aspect. He has practiced with heat sense the most. Looking around, he could see clearly with thermal vision. While he couldn't see, he could feel where heat was and wasn't. He had practiced combining different elements to see if they had any effects but the only one that truly had potential was thermal and lightning. When he released them together, it made a plasma-like substance that was hard to control in large quantities. Thermal energy could be contained and then released to produce a blast of fire or heat but plasma didn't want to follow the same rule set. Lightning was more like point and shoot if Izuku wants to hit anything accurately. While he didn't necessarily need to aim with his hands it made things easier. He had tried to blast thermal through his elbow and chest and they were successful but lightning didn't want to stay on course without guidance. Absorbing multiple energies at the same time had also been successful. While using thermal energy he was practically immune because he absorbed what hit him. It didn't protect him from kinetic energy. So he had to split his focus on releasing thermal and absorbing kinetic for protection. How did he practice this? By running into trees as he blasted rocks in the clearing, very dignified. It was 1 week away from the UA entrance exam and he was as prepared as he could be. His thermal energy reserves were still not at capacity, he could hold more. Electricity energy was low since he couldn't go around draining the country's electric energy. Kinetic was alright. Ever since he began jumping off roofs he has gotten a steady supply of kinetic energy. Sound and light both were low, but they wouldn't be hard to absorb if need be. He had passed his last year of online school long ago and had too much free time for his health. His body was lean and very fit from his daily routine and diet. Now all he had to do is wait for the exam. 3 days before the exam, Izuku sat next to the window as he read one of his books. It was almost midnight and the weather forecast said there will be a storm coming in soon. He put his book down and stared at the roiling dark clouds with lightning arcing through them sporadically. I'm fine with thermal. I can pass with thermal and kinetic. There is no need for more. He mumbled to himself, trying to convince himself that his plan wasn't idiotic. I'm going to fucking die. I can turn back anytime. He spoke to himself as the wind threatened to knock him over. He couldn't let an opportunity slip out of his fingers. So he stood at his clearing in the woods with menacing clouds overhead. I want more. He stared up at the heavens above and began to absorb the static. In a lightning storm, there was a lot of static and Izuku was filling up with electrical energy with that alone, but he wanted more. The first lightning strike hit near him and he missed the chance to absorb it when he was blinded by the light. Right, thermal for the heat. A small amount of light for the arc. And lightning for the lightning. He began to absorb some light around his face to protect himself from getting blinded again. Again, lightning stuck and he was ready. With his arm raised it took all its electrical energy and what thermal energy it released. He could see the arc go into his hand and be sucked into his core. It was wonderful. That single lightning strike was enough for 2 large blasts. With confidence, he waited and absorbed more of the static around him, but the Zeus didn't want to throw any more lightning at him. The clouds slowly moved away from his clearing. No. I want it all. Izuku shouted to the heavens, but they didn't listen. Fine, then. With the lightning he absorbed, he shot it back into the sky, and through it followed the cloud's lightning. He absorbed it and he did it again and again until the gods got angry at him and began to rain lightning strike after lightning strike right at him. From far away people could see the lightning storm roll in slowly. It struck somewhere in the woods and then again. The saying goes lightning doesn't strike the same place twice, but it did that night. Strike after strike landed in the same spot in the woods. People watched as 100 lightning strikes landed back to back in the same location. There were many videos and pictures uploaded that night from the freak phenomenon. After the lightning stopped striking, heroes investigated the scene to find a charred clearing and the smell of ozone throughout the area. A few days later found Izuku walking under the gates of UA. While nervous about all the people, he had confidence in his ability to pass the exam. After the written exam, Izuku sat with thousands of other hopefuls for the practical exam. Present Mike walked on stage and explained what they would need to do to pass the exam. Izuku took it all in and felt grateful to develop such a versatile quirk. The explanation ended and Izuku made his way to the provided locker room to change into some sportswear. He wore a tank top and shorts to avoid getting his clothes charred or torn in case of kinetic blasts. Now he was debating whether or not to leave his red quirkless shoes on. He didn't want to ruin them, but he could just take them off at the sight. With a nod, he headed to the buses. The gates to the mock city were huge to Izuku's eyes and probably everyone else's as well. The other test takes had a variety of quirks and mutations. Some strppd some clothing, and Izuku followed suit and took off his socks and shoes and set them next to a pile of female clothes. Another article of clothing landed on the pile and Izuku looked back to see nothing. He turned his thermal vision on and immediately shut it down when he got a glimpse of a female figure in a tight suit. With red cheeks, Izuku mumbled, "Sorry," and walked away from the pile of clothes and his shoes. He didn't hear any reply as he got to a space and tried to focus on the upcoming test. He calmed some and thought about his plan to successfully pass the exam. He wasn't sure how many points he needed to pass, but more is better. A loud shout from the top of a tower behind Izuku shocked him out of his thoughts. There is no countdown in real life. Go. Present Mike yelled out with his quirk for all to hear. Izuku didn't hesitate and released kinetic energy through his feet to launch himself over the competition. The cement cracked and he was flying forward. Passing the mob, he saw a one-pointer. He aimed and fired a lightning bolt straight through its chest and exited its back and stopped at the ground below it. Too much power, he melted a hole and wasted unnecessary energy. He landed without any issue and kept running and then leaped again. He found himself in front of a pack of two-pointers. He leaped a few feet back and released a concentrated stream of thermal energy. It washed over the robots and caused many to melt in contact with the superheated flame. He stopped and 3 slag piles remained. He absorbed the remaining thermal and moved forward with vigor. In the viewing room for the UA staff, a tall skinny blonde narrowed his eyes on Izuku Midoriya. He remembered the green-haired teen from almost a year ago and he remembers that he didn't have a quirk, much less 3. Who is that boy? His question was directed at Nizu but his eyes never left the screen with the teen that blocked a strike from a three-pointer like it was nothing. For quirks he corrected himself. Sabotage. An Izuku Midoriya, online schooling with great grades and quirkless. How peculiar. Nizu hummed with interest in the boy. He saw what All Might saw but he could see all of his abilities are connected. Aizawa took a look at the boy's profile on the screen. He lied about having a quirk. Not very logical to me. What do you plan to do? Midnight asked her boss. I'll have a word with him. All Might said with a growl. No, you will not. We'll play it by ear. I'm curious about what this is about. Nizu stopped All Might from leaving the room. You can't be serious. He could be one of his. All Might hissed with fury. Steam rose from his body in preparation. Last warning, Yagi. You will leave him alone. Nizu's beady eyes bore into the number 1 hero's blue eyes. This will be a mistake. He growled and stood with his arms crosses as he glared at the screen with the green-haired boy. Izuku had to admit that destroying robots was very cathartic. It was a piece of cake to find his next target with his sixth sense keyed into electrical energy. He could feel the moving energy sources as he ran through the mock city. He had lost track of his points a little while ago but he was confident that he had enough to pass. Looking around, the other exam takers showed some panic on their faces. Most likely the time limit was getting to them or the dangerous environment. More than one time, Izuku had to step in to help another examinee from getting overwhelmed or hurt. Kinetic absorption stopped any blows from landing and his lightning stopped any more resistance for the bots. He had taken to draining the robots for electrical energy to refill his stores of energy. Whatever battery they had was good and filled him up bit by bit. Then, there was a rumble from the center of the city. A massive robot arose from the streets, the zero-pointer. Everyone began to flee in panic and self-preservation. Izuku was going to follow suit when he heard a cry for help. He looked behind him and saw no one. He focused on thermal and saw a figure under some rubble. The invisible girl, no one could see her and the robot was treading closer by the second. Izuku leapt into action and got to the girl in a moment. She was pinned by the rubble on her leg. I can't get free. She sounded panicked. Izuku looked under the large slab and found where her leg was. Placing his palm next to it he concentrated points on his hand with kinetic energy and released. The stone cracked and Izuku could lift the remaining stone off of her. She tried to put weight on her leg only to collapse. Izuku took one of her arms and slung it under him and helped her move out of the way of the robot. He looked back and it wasn't stopping. Oh, F off you robot. Electrical energy arced over his hand and focused on his pointed fingers aimed at the chest of the robot. He dumped half of the electrical energy and fired. Anyone watching was momentarily blinded as the arc of the lightning obliterated a hole straight through the chest of the zero-pointer. The giant robot stopped in its tracks and began to explode and fall apart. In shock and awe at the spectacle, Izuku continued to pull the invisible girl away from the calamity happening behind him. While he did want to watch the 10-story robot collapse, he had someone to help. That's time's up. If you require medical attention, please go to the exit or wait where you are. Present Mick's stuttering broke everyone out of shock at the scene before them. He is too dangerous. We need to stop him. Yagi yelled at the rat bear thing. He risked his own life for Miss Hagakure. Nizu calmly replied. It's an act. The number one hero didn't relent. How can you know that? Nizu was beginning to get annoyed at the skinny man's arguing. You will not speak or touch the boy. If you do so, there will be severe consequences. Am I clear? In response, he got a glare and the man looked away. Izuku set down the girl by a building next to the exit. He could hear the whispering going on around him but tried to ignore them. How is the leg? It's hard to tell how injured you are. He asked. I'll be okay, thank you for your help. That was incredible. You completely wrecked that bot. I'm Toru Hagakure. She gushed at Izuku's work and held out a hand to shake. Izuku, still the nervous boy, blushed under the praise. Izuku Midoriya, I'm just glad you're not too hurt. He shook her hand to her surprise. Still at the time she was completely invisible with not even her clothes to guess what she was doing at the time. You can see me. She said under her breath. Izuku was interrupted by an old lady's cane pushing him to the side. Clear the way for an old woman. Let's see the damage. Recovery girl ambled up to the sitting girl. She tapped her glasses and they turned white from the outside. Bruised leg and sprained ankle by the looks of it. She kissed the leg and Hagakure let out a sigh of relief. Izuku meanwhile was beginning to become uncomfortable with the stares of the other teens and left before anything else happened. Grabbing his shoes, he made his way back to the locker rooms to change and head to his apartment. Hagakure lost the chance to talk to the curious green boy. On his way to the apartments, Izuku felt good. He was able to help someone and he got to blow off steam all the while working on his plan to become a hero. Maybe Hagakure will be in his class, a somewhat familiar face would be nice. He stopped by an ice cream shop and bought a cone for his private celebration. While walking, he checked his core for his energy reserves. Electrical energy took a major hit with that last lightning strike and getting more will be hard unless there is another lightning storm soon. Thermal was less of an issue and easy to absorb. It dipped a fraction but he wasn't worried about it. Kinetic energy was down about a quarter but wasn't worried about that one either. He didn't use light or sound so that was the same. All in all, he was happy with what he had spent. An hour later, Izuku sat at his desk and stared at the large box with All Might merch. He was tempted to use it for fuel but knew that would be wasteful. So he turned on his computer and logged in at an auctioning site for hero merch. He took pictures of each item and set them up all for sale under one item. He set the starting bid somewhat high and let the website do its job. Some extra money will be nice in case of emergencies. 3 days later, he checked up on the auction to see what he got for bids. He stared at the final price listed. He stared and stared some more. Then he reloaded the website just in case there was a bug. The whole set was sold for 3 million yen, $10,000. He couldn't comprehend that his merch was worth so much but he wasn't going to complain. He got the exchange location and it was in front of a police station, much to his comfort. He sent a message to the bid winner that he will be there in an hour for the meet-up. The buyer asked for 2 hours instead and he agreed. 2 hours later, Izuku found himself on a bench outside a police station. A man caught his eye and the man nodded in greeting. Izuku stared at the man who used to be All Might's sidekick. He was in a suit and had a serious face about him. Kid Might 2335. Sir asked with his monotone voice. Sir Might 009 I take it. Here is the merch, you're free to check if you like. He sighed at the username he made up when he was younger. He moved forward and sifted through the box. May I ask why you are selling? He didn't stop as he checked each item. You know the saying, never meet your heroes, it's true. He said something that changed my views of him and I didn't like my room covered in his face. He said honestly. I see. He said simply. Izuku shuffled through his bag and pulled out the right notebook. He opened it and asked. Could I get your autograph? Sir looked up and took the notebook filled with his profile. He read through what the boy had written. This analysis is yours. Izuku nodded. It's rough and amateurish but it holds potential. He signed it at the top next to his drawn face. Izuku felt warm under the praise. Thank you, sir. What are your plans for the future? Oh, I took the UA entrance exam a few days ago. I'm going into the hero course. A shame, your ability to dissect people would have been a boon for anyone who hired you. Don't let that skill wither. He gave Izuku an envelope with the money, picked up the box, and left. Izuku smiled once again at the praise and put the envelope in his bag after counting it. With a hop in his step, he headed back to the apartment to wait for his exam results. 5. Troubles while waiting for his exam scores. Izuku used some of his newfound fortune to buy a new pair of his favorite shoes. While they made him stand out for having a second joint that identified a quirkless, they were very comfortable. His old ones were good for a while longer but not to last, especially for rigorous exercise and training on the UA campus. He got the usual sneer from the cashier when he made the purchase and looks from other customers when he left. He ignored them all after all. Lashing out wouldn't end well for him and his plan. After leaving the shoe store in the mall, he made his way to his apartment with a book he picked up on the way. He thought about stopping at a hair parlor to get a haircut but he decided against it. His hair was long enough to put in a ponytail and he did when exercising. It didn't get in his way too much and he kinda liked the way it felt on his neck. He should cut it though, it was getting unruly. A few days later, Izuku found a UA letter in the mailbox. He stared at it and quickly moved to the apartment and then to his room. He sat at his desk and opened it with anticipation. Papers fell out with a metal disc. He took the disc and pushed a button on the side. It is I. To dash, Izuku clenched his fist and hit the button again. He had to set the disc down and force himself to calm down. He was just tempted to absorb any energy it had and melt it but refrained. Why would the number one hero be announcing his test scores for UA? The only thing he could think of is his limit on being a hero. That would give the BSTRD an excuse to limit his time when he was heavily injured. That would mean he would be at UA and Izuku would have to interact with him at some point. He had hoped that with Bakugo gone, he wouldn't have to deal with any more people that he couldn't stand. With a long exhale, he picked up the device and pushed the button again. It is I. To give you your test score. Izuku Midoriya. All Might seemed to grit his teeth as he said his name, something to note for later. You passed the written exam at the top of your class. For your practical, you have shown some very interesting abilities. He said the last part with emphasis and then looked off screen at someone speaking to him. You got 67 villain points and for heroic deed, you earned 85 more points. Welcome to UA, he finished tersely. Small videos showed Izuku helping others while taking the test, and the holograph shut off. Izuku promptly grabbed the device, drained it, and melted it into a pile of slag. He set the paperweight on his desk and let out a sigh. Ignoring the number one hero, he had made it. He was in line to become a hero. He let out tears of joy as he internally celebrated his success. After all the grief and pain he endured, he was going to get a chance to live his dream. Wiping his tears away, he picked up the slip of papers and read them over. They were asking about his measurements and his design for a hero costume. He wrinkled his nose at some of the hero costumes he designed before he met All Might. He shook his head at the thought of any of them. He grabbed his notebook and began to brainstorm on what he would want to need. Mobility would be ideal, armor would have little benefit with his kinetic absorption. He would need something that would be able to handle extreme temperatures and something that would let him release energy through his feet for propulsion. While running barefoot at the exam worked, it wasn't comfortable for long PRDS. He would need to have something that his quirk passed through. He remembered Hagakure at the exam and that she had a suit of some kind so she wouldn't be naked for her quirk to be effective. He researched and found that a company used the person's hair to create clothes that worked with their quirk. He jotted the name down on the costume's design and outlined what he wanted. Now, to get the hair. Good thing he wanted to get a haircut. The next day, Izuku found a hairdresser that could use her quirk to grow his hair out and cut it. It was perfect for his hero costume. He left with a bag of his hair and a lighter head. He kept his hair short but also enough to curl as he liked. With that, he sent everything to UA. He continued to practice his quirk in the woods until the first day of school started. He was anxious and worried that UA would be another Aldera. He hopes that he is wrong, but he has been burned too many times, literally and figuratively, to trust anyone. He will have to be careful and watch everyone. Anyone that passed the exam will undoubtedly be powerful, and Izuku saw what power did to people. He walked through the halls of UA for the search of 1A, but whoever built it made it like a maze. He held in a snort when a person with a minotaur quirk walked in the opposite direction he did. He had 5 minutes before class started and he began to panic until he saw 1B then 1A. He heard some commotion inside and took in a breath before opening the large door. He scanned over his new classmate and then froze at who he saw. Katsuki Bakugo sat by the windows as a tall blue-haired boy said something Izuku didn't hear. He didn't see anything else as he stared at his tormentor for a decade with cold fury. Why was he here? How was he allowed to come here when he was arrested before his own eyes? Bakugo felt someone staring and he turned to meet Izuku's cold eyes. Bakugo snarled and looked like he wanted to say something but instead looked away. The tall teen moved in front of Izuku and he tensed. Greeting. I am Dash. If you are here to make friends then leave. Izuku spun at the voice and stared at the sleeping bag on the ground. He backed away as a man stood up. My name is Shota Aizawa, put these on and meet me outside. He pulled out a box and left. The class was quiet as Aizawa left. Izuku took one of the uniforms in his size and left after shooting Bakugo a glare. Soon, the rest of the class followed his lead. In the locker room, the boys in his class chatted with each other as they strpped and changed into their uniforms. Izuku took a corner and took off his shirt. The room got quiet. Izuku turned to see everyone staring at his back and chest. The split-haired teen got a look and then began to change again. Bakugo didn't say anything and kept changing. It's rude to stare, Izuku said and put on his shirt. His back and chest were covered in burn scars and other healed injuries. His arms were a little better but his tan hid them better. Bro, what happened to you to get so many scars? A red-haired teen asked with worry filling his eyes. Most of the others also had the same look. Bad school life. Izuku left after he finished without explaining anymore. The green-haired student stood outside and in front of Aizawa. The man was standing there bored but Izuku could see that he was looking the student over. Soon, the rest of the class joined with the boys somewhat quieter as the girls chatted between themselves. Izuku spotted one particular person and he turned his sixth sense on thermal. He was glad the invisible girl passed and was in his class, maybe she would be nice. It took you too long. Time is precious and in the hero industry even more so. Midoriya, you passed in first place. Throw this as far as you can with your quirk. Aizawa tossed a baseball at Izuku and he caught it. Don't leave the circle. Izuku ignored the confused glare Bakugo gave Aizawa and Izuku. He stepped into the circle and got into an amateurish pitcher stance. He threw the ball and released half of his kinetic energy into it. He had plenty to spare, he hoped. With a crack, it was sent sailing through the air. He turned back to Aizawa and he held up a device with his distance. 5 meters, you all will be showing me what you can do with your quirks. He said with a tired drawl. We can use our quirks. This is going to be so fun. A pink girl with horns cheered with some of his classmates. The mood dropped when Aizawa glared at all of them. Fun you say. Then let's do this, last place is expelled. Before you say anything about fairness, hero business isn't fair. Get used to it. The class was shocked and some worried about what would come. Izuku barely heard any of it as he kept an eye on Bakugo, who seemed to be grinding his teeth and glaring at Izuku. The class moved forward to a sand STRP and Aizawa called forward 2 students to run. Izuku waited in the line of students when he felt a nug on his arm. He looked over and Hagakure stood next to him waving with her sleeve showing the movement. It's nice to see you again, Midoriya. I'm glad to made it. And I wanted to thank you again for saving me at the exam. She said quietly but with vigor. Izuku turned on his sixth sense and smiled a bit at the invisible girl. He could see her features in close range and she was smiling at him in return. I'm glad you made it too. Oh ho, you two know each other. The pink girl stepped close to the two. Izuku instinctively stepped away from her proximity. Midoriya here saved me from getting run over by the 0-pointer and then blew it up. Hagakure said to the pink girl while acting out the scene at the exam. Less talking, Midoriya, you're up. Aizawa broke the conversation and Izuku moved to the line next to a teen with a bird head. Tokoyami, as Aizawa called him, nodded to Izuku and took his place to run. Izuku took off his shoes and socks before lining up and waiting. Izuku shot kinetic force through his feet in short bursts with each footfall and sped across the finish line. Tokoyami passed a few seconds later with the help of a bird shadow pushing behind the teen. The rest of the tests went along without any issues except for the glares Bakugo shot at Izuku and back at him. Hagakure kept quiet after Aizawa's rebuking but still stood next to Izuku the whole time, which made Izuku feel a bit better. With Bakugo in his class, he felt like he wanted to snap, but Hagakure was a nice distraction from the presence of his torture. Another welcome distraction was all the new quirks he saw. He itched to write in his notebook about all the observations he made. He caught himself mumbling more than a few times and feared Hagakure would make fun of him, but she never said anything. Here are your scores. Read them yourselves. Aizawa put a projection of their ranks. Izuku placed in 5th place after Bakugo, but he expected that. He only had his quirk for less than a year, but he was happy with his results. That didn't mean he wasn't going to train even more to surpass everyone. Hagakure was placed 18th with a short purple-haired boy last. He cried in horror but stopped when Aizawa spoke again. Also, I lied about being expelled. Think of it as a ruse to motivate you all. And with that, he left. The class was shocked except for a girl who gave Izuku a presumptuous air to her. The class was dismissed for the day and everyone left to change and leave. Izuku left not to get changed but to find a gym to take advantage of their advanced training gyms. Izuku was tired but he could handle a few more hours. He found a passing upperclassman and he was pointed to a gym with his specifications. The gym he opened to was empty and had a panel for many elements to fire at the middle of the arena. There were also targets on the sides of the octagonal arena for Izuku to practice his aim. It was perfect for him. He played around with the control panel to see what it could do and was very satisfied with it. He set the projectiles for streams of fire, bolts of electricity, and small RBB ball. He set it at low to start and at a timer to stop by itself. He stepped into the center and the floor spun slowly as the first object shot at him. Izuku blocked the ball with his arm and it fell to the ground with its kinetic force absorbed. It kept going until the timer ran out and Izuku turned up the difficulty just a notch. He focused on trying to absorb energy directly and then shoot out a different energy at a target on the walls. 2 hours later he was sweating and exhausted but felt like he had a successful training time. He changed and headed to the apartment with a smile on his face. For the whole time he was training, Izuku completely forgot about both All Might and Bakugo. The next morning, Izuku was watching the video again to learn how to tie his tie properly. It took him way too long but finally, it looked proper. He left the apartment with a bagel in his mouth and excitement for the day to come. While having Bakugo in his class ruined some of the experience of learning how to be a hero, he will have to do his best to ignore him. He entered the classroom. And found his seat, right behind Bakugo. Nope. He turned to look over at his classmates and choose someone at random. His eyes landed on the redhead from the locker room, Kirishima. Kirishima. I am Izuku Midoriya, could we switch seats? Izuku asked directly, most of the class was watching the interaction. Izuku didn't care. Sure, but why? Kirishima shrugged as he got up. The seating arrangement has been made for a reason, it is very important that we stick to our assigned seats. Ida lectured as he stood and chopped his arms down in rapid movements. Izuku looked over at Ida and saw earnestness instead of ridicule like he thought he would. It would be distracting for my education. More like he couldn't stand to look at that spiky blonde all day before snapping at some point. Bakugo abruptly stood up to lash out but glared and held his tongue instead. Whoa, I'm alright with suching. Kirishima moved slightly between the two glares, one feral and the other cold and calculating. Aizawa stepped through the door at that moment and Kirishima took Izuku's seat. He stared at the two before his eyes snapped to Bakugo for a split second before continuing like nothing happened. From their school went on normally with heroes coming in and teaching mundane subjects like history and math. Lunch came around and Izuku took a chance to eat in the cafeteria for the first time in years. If worst came to worst, he would eat quickly and find a quiet spot to pass the PRD. He took his plate of food and found an empty table at the corner where he could see the whole cafeteria without turning too much. Izuku sat and began to eat while watching everyone who got too close or eyed him. He felt anxious as he took his first bite of food, it was good. Hagakure was the first to sit next to him, much to his surprise. He turned on his sixth sense to see her facial expression. Where did you go yesterday? I wanted to chat some more after school. She was very expressive both in her movements and her facial features. She has shown both honesty and a bit of sadness. Sorry, I didn't know you wanted to talk to me. I stayed late to train in one of the gyms. Izuku didn't mention that he wanted to avoid Bakugo also. Mina and a few more of his classmates sat around at the table he was at. He began to feel caged around on all sides but kept it well hidden. Bakugo sat far away from his table with Kirishima, which did make him feel slightly better. So. You never finished how Midori here saved you at the exams. Mina first started. She leaned in towards Hagakure's shoulder. Oh. So I was completely invisible when the zero-pointer came out and some rubble pinned my leg and I couldn't escape. I thought that the thing couldn't see me and that I was going to get run over, so I did what anyone would have done, I screamed for help. Izuku ate as she retold the story to everyone. I thought I was dead, no one could see me. Then, Midoriya came sprinting at full tilt right at me and got the rubble off of me. He helped me move since my leg was busted and the zero-pointer was hot on our heels. So, Midoriya turns around and tells the thing to F off and blasts it with a giant lightning bolt that melted a hole straight through its chest. It was incredible. That thing went down hard, it was some movie-level action. Hagakure gestured with her arms the whole time telling the story. The table was quiet as they listened with rapt attention and many faces were shocked at the end of the story. Izuku felt everyone's attention settle on him and he felt his proverbial hackles rise. He could read that they all had some sort of disbelief on their faces, but Izuku still didn't feel comfortable with that much attention, it never ended well for him in the past. You took down a zero-pointer. Mina shouted in disbelief. Lightning. I thought you had some force quirk or something. Kaminari asked in confusion. You're right, that does sound like prime action movie material. Shiro agreed with Hagakure. Izuku looked at everyone at the table and saw that there was no malice or mockery in their eyes. He felt wary and anxious at all the directed attention but did his best to answer. Lightning is a facet of my quirk. I can absorb and release energies I've stored. Izuku looked around and saw interest in everyone's eyes, including Hagakure, who was leaning in. He gave them a small display and held his palm up. He released some flames, then an arc of electricity ran through his fingers followed by a ball of light then a black void. He left out kinetic and sound since they wouldn't be visible. He looked up from his palm and saw everyone's awestruck eyes. That's so cool. What was the last one? Was it dark energy? Like magic. Mina rose out of her seat and then gasped. Can you do some spooky dark magic? She finished the last part with a whisper. You can absorb electricity. Well, you completely counter me. No fair. Kaminari began to sulk as Shiro patted his back in comfort. Then, the blonde got an idea that bloomed in his head. No, it was just me absorbing the light. He leaned back a little from Mina's enthusiasm. Izuku felt a poke from Hagakure. He turned and saw her face close to his. He jerked back in surprise and almost fell off his seat. So you can see me. I heard you say something like that at the exam but didn't get a chance to ask you before you left. Izuku could see Hagakure's face turn eager when she asked. Izuku sat back in his chair. Yeah, I can sense or see different energies when I focus. I focused on thermal energy and can see you radiate heat so I can see all of you. Head, hair, and face but not color. I can't see what color your hair is or eyes. He began to ramble and cut himself off with an internal curse and looked around for their reaction to his weirdness. Mina was smirking in a teasing way but held no ill intent. Kaminari and Shiro didn't seem to care but were listening anyways. He then looked at Hagakure and he could see her face was hotter than before. Are you okay? Ah yeah. I've always been invisible and you being able to see me is kinda embarrassing is all. She covered her face and hid a smile. Oh, I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Izuku felt ashamed for seeing something private like that. Hagakure waved her hands back and forward in denial. No. No, it's okay, I don't mind. She still smiled and glanced around without worrying that someone would see her. Then she reminded herself that there was a boy that could do just that next to her. She covered her face again in embarrassment. Izuku was about to say something but the bell rang and lunch ended. Everyone made their way to their next class. Izuku headed to his first hero class. Kaminari looked over at Izuku with a question to ask but waited for a better time. Shiro strolled along with an easy smile. Mina was talking to Hagakure in hushed whispers but it was clear to hear Mina giggling as Hagakure covered her face with her arms.